Okay, continuing on with our discussion of each of these tabs in the light mapping panel. The next one we're going to look at is going to be bake. Now, the bake's primary job, if we go ahead and switch over to that, Lee.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
There we go.
So the primary job of the bake panel is really setting most of the global illumination parameters that we have for Beast. So again, global illumination is something that is not available if you have Unity Standard. With Unity Pro, you've got that. So obviously this is pretty important. We're not going to jump into any technical discussion when we start talking about samples and rays, etc., etc. We'll give you a quick overview so that you'll have some idea of what you're doing when you are manipulating the parameters found on this panel. But I'd like to remind you that we are planning an advanced lighting series where we will be looking at all of these parameters along with many more that you don't see here. Again, those are the ones that you'd be working with if you were doing the settings yourself manually in that XML file we discussed earlier. We'll be covering all of the technical aspects of how all of these parameters work against one another or with one another in order to give you a very nicely lit texture that will automatically be applied back to your geometry. Blah, that was a mouthful. So Lee, let's go ahead and just kind of work our way down through some of these and give them an idea of what they've got.
Okay, well, the very first one is the mode, which is basically determining whether or not we're using dual light maps or single light maps. If you remember in our overview discussion, when we were starting to talk about our rendering paths, we discussed that certain rendering paths being deferred, is what I'm talking about, supported dual light maps.
That's right, where if you were using forward rendering, like from the days of Unity 2.x, forward rendering is only going to use one of them.
Correct. So to demonstrate what we're talking about, I'm going to mess around with our shadow distance a little bit and see if I can get our shadow map to a point where it will actually show the difference between single and dual light maps. So let me get the shadow distance. We'll scroll it. It's almost so hard to see now.
Yeah, it's quite fine, if you will.
So
I can see it, but I don't know if they can. Yeah,
right. It might not show up with your encoding. So if I bring it in close, you can see that the speck here has gone away. And if I bring it further out, you can just start to see the speck showing up on the red ball. So my guess is the easiest place to actually see what's going on is going to be looking for the speck on the red ball to disappear and reappear as we adjust some settings here. So basically, with dual light maps, we're talking about you have a near light map and a far light map.
And we could show them again if you jump over to the maps panel.
Yep. So we have our near maps and our far maps, and each have a different amount of intensity. So
and different information that's baked into it. Like the near map in this case, because of our lights being set to auto, those lights for near are holding things like the bounce light, which if I can see the mouse real quick.
Yes, go ahead.
Thanks. If you look really close, you can see that information right here. But you don't see all of the actual direct illumination provided by the lights. If you look around, everything else is it's dark. It's just really that information that Lee was just showing you as he was backing off and pulling in the shadow distance here, as you started to see the specular information that we can see right here and our bounce lighting as well. But as we jump over to the far map, once we're using the far map, you can see in the far maps all of the illumination and the shadows and everything else that exists in there. Again, with the whole idea being that you would want to set up a scene so that your real-time lights are going to be illuminating things that are right there in front of the player, so that, as you see characters running around, they're going to be casting shadows and everything's going to feel dynamic from these real-time lights. And then everything a little bit further back that's kind of in the background is lit statically.
Right. What I did is I turned off the lights.
That's going to make it very easy
so
to
we
see.
can see it a lot easier, the difference. So if you notice, if I dial the shadow distance all the way down, we have a much brighter scene, but we lost the speck in our normal maps. So that corresponds with our much brighter scene. So this would be our far maps. because they're much more lit. We've got the blues in here.
Much more. They just have the direct lighting. Better yet.
Correct.
Yeah.
So basically, this is the full lighting that's been baked out, whereas if we bring our distance further out, we've got more reds. We don't see the blues as much, and we're just picking up the indirect lighting.
Yeah, we're seeing all this bounce lighting now. So the illumination that's coming up from the floor hitting the bottom of the ball, and the light over on that far wall a little bit to the left that's bouncing off the side of the box.
Right. So to demonstrate what's going to happen is what'll happen when we go and switch from dual light maps to single light maps is the fact that we're only going to have the single map, which is the far map that has all the lighting information baked into it. So once we turn it off, what we expect to see is what we see here right now. But so to prove it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the scene and I'm going to put the shadow distance halfway through it, so we see the blend between the near and the far.
And since Lee's turned all of the lights off in the scene, we don't see any real-time lighting occurring in the front, and so of course everything's going to get nice.
And you can verify that because we no longer have the shadow from our non-static little box that we put in. If I actually turn, say, the fill light back on, we can, let's see, let's just turn them all back on so we can pick it up.
It's right there to the right of it,
Yep.
just very, very subtle.
Yeah. It's hard to see, but if I bring it, well, hold on, we need to go back out. There we go. So if I start bringing...
Oh, from where I was sitting, I was looking at something else like a shadow. It's pretty funny.
Okay.
Scale it up a little bit.
The actual cube? No problem.
Yeah. Just it makes it a little bit easier to see. People that are viewing the video,
Right.
small format.
And actually, I can raise it up too. So
There you
there's
go.
our shadows. So as you can see, we've got this cube, which is not marked as static, so it's the only thing in our scene that's casting a real-time shadow. So by turning off all the lights, we can tell that there are no real-time lights.
Yeah, not only did the shadows vanish, but the illumination on the cube itself has vanished
Right.
from all of those lights.
So once again, I'm going to bring our divider about halfway through our scene. So our shadow distance is halfway between our near maps and our far maps. So what I'm going to come over here to do is back to our bake tab where our mode is in dual light maps. I'm actually going to switch over to our single light map, and it completely lights up
Just like
we
you
expected.
said, we're just using the one map with all of the information.
Correct. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you what happens when we go to forward lighting. I'm going to switch back into dual light maps again. I'm going to pull this out of the way for now, and I'm going to come back up to Edit, Project Settings, Player, and here where our rendering path is, I'm going to switch from deferred back to forward lighting, and the effect that we're going to get is just like we get when we select single light map.
That's right, because again, with forward lighting or forward rendering, excuse me, we don't have the ability to utilize two maps.
Correct. So I'm going to go back to deferred.
And it's really cool because with the dual maps, the default setup, meaning to record all information on that near map being that bounce light information and all, those are the light, the illumination in your scene that you would not see from real-time lights. And that gives you the ability to bake that bounce lighting in close and then use real-time lights with it so that everything feels right. Somebody runs by and they cast shadows and all, but you have this bounce light effect filling the scene, and that's really, really cool.
Right. Especially when you turn on the lights back in, you can actually see how well the real-time lights blend in with the other ones. We actually had to stop and look and figure out where it was blending, and we had to look for key markers that would indicate where we're getting stuff. So that is basically what happens with, or what the mode dual light maps, single light maps does for us. So with that, we'll move on to the next one. Our next setting is a quality setting. This is just basically a quick selector between some preset values for your final gather rays and your contrast threshold. So as I switch to low, you can see that final gather rays drops to 200 and our contrast threshold goes up a little bit to compensate. Just to it's a preset value that the guys at Unity decided looked good for an all-around type of setting. So this is what they've dialed in. It just gives you an easy way to switch between a high-quality light map bake and a low one for testing purposes.
Yeah, quickly. And in fact, we can go ahead and flip it over to low in case you want to do some renders in just a few minutes. It's funny, I say renders as if this was a 3D application like Maya. I mean, it starts to feel that way. But you got to remember that scene that you're seeing below in the game panel. I mean, that's actually a 3D environment we're seeing through the camera, so it's not just a still picture that's rendered out.
Right. Well, so that's basically all the quality does. So it's just a quick selector. We're going to leave it on low for the remainder of this video, just so our renders when we're testing stuff will be a bit faster. So the next one down is bounces. Now, basically what bounces is part of calculating out the global illumination of how much the rays of light are bouncing around in our scene. So how many times they'll interact with the objects, bounce off another one, and keep going. Now, the settings that we have are 0 through 4. If you actually select 0, you are, in essence, telling the Beast engine to completely disable all global illumination.
And while this entire panel is global illumination heavy as far as the settings with final gathering and setting all of your interpolation points and things like that, not all of this panel is. I just want to make sure that when I said a few minutes ago that it's mostly about global illumination, it is mostly about global illumination, but there is the ambient occlusion, which we'll get to here in a few minutes. I just wanted to point that out real quick,
right,
so nobody misunderstood me in thinking it's only global illumination. Now, taking that down to 0, that means you're saying that right now we should be able to bake this out, and the light that is illuminating the bottom of our sphere, that bounce light that's coming up from the floor, if you have 0 bounces, we should get no light down there.
Right, we can try it. And it should be fairly quick because
Absolutely.
we have no global illumination. So if I bring this up,
so
we can see our progress
watch.
bar. Yep, we won't have to wait 5 or 6 minutes for these renders to happen. So
5 or 6? No, there's all sorts of ways that you can make it go pretty fast, getting a blotchy result, but something that'll still give you an idea of the amount of an illumination, and then you can tweak a few things to turn it into crazy long bake times.
the kind where you go to bed.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
wait for the next day.
Okay, so just about done.
Yep, it's actually writing out.
So watch the bottom of the sphere. Here it comes.
Right there.
Oh, bounce lighting. Say goodbye.
Yep, so all the extra lighting that was being thrown around in our scene from the global illumination and the final gather is now gone. So what we have is just the light being calculated from our 3 spotlights in the scene, and that's it. So we still have our shadows. It looks okay, but it's not great. Not saying that what we had before was that awesome, but still it looked better than what we've got now.
Demonstration purposes only. So I mean, yeah. So let's go ahead and get at least one bounce back in, and then maybe we'll come back and add a few more once we start talking about some of these other parameters.
And just like we, our previous video, anytime there's something that has a number associated with it, if you increase that number, odds are you're going to be increasing your render times.
Yeah.
Or your bake times in this case. You can see now you got me saying it. All right. So the next one is our skylight color. This is the color that is going to be added into the scene through global illumination, almost like it's
almost like the natural ambient light that you're getting from the sky. I mean,
yeah. So, and that can be adjusted just like any other color picker. So you could go anything from a nice, clear midday summer
so
sky.
give it a little bit of a bluish hue to it. A little more to the white side with a little hint of blue.
I was just wondering if you were talking about going more towards a night scene.
Oh, I see what you're saying. We could do that too.
So you can pick something a little bit darker.
And then now we can turn around and take that intensity and turn that up, because at a value of 0, we're just not going to get anything there.
All the skylight color disappears when we have 0.
Think of it as just a multiplier.
Right. So the higher this number is, the more light that is going to get thrown around in the scene attributed to the bounces in the skylight color.
The more light, or the brighter the intensity?
The brighter. It's almost like you've got a brighter sky, so you're getting more light into the scene. It looks brighter.
I see what you're saying.
But because we're going with a darker blue, we don't want a whole lot in there. We're going to try to go with something that looks a little bit darker, a little bit more moody. So if we do,
I say turn it up to 0.5 and let them really see it. For the first
the big
time.
difference. Okay, no problem.
Because we don't have to do the subtle tweaking at the moment. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what it will be for everyone out there. It's just a matter of tweaking the settings to getting the look that they need.
Right. Once you get your actual concept artist and you've got your color palettes and you know what your scene's going for, then you can use this to come in here and tweak out to match what you're looking for.
Exactly.
So, and we're almost done. These are still low quality renders, so they go fast.
And the biggest thing with the low quality bake that we've got going on here that's contributing to this speed is our final gather raise. Instead of 1,000 having only 200 definitely makes things go a bit faster.
Yeah, if you have, the Super Wampidine 20 core computer, and then by all means, render out 5,000 rays.
Here it comes. Watch the overall scene now. Kapow!
So
that's why I wanted to go with 0.5, because 0.25, you would have seen it, but it would have been relatively subtle.
Right.
This here lit that room up, put a lot more ambient light into the whole room.
So, and it does have a darker blue hue to the whole thing. So, well, that explains those two. So, shall we move on to the next one?
Yeah, we can. Now, if you'd like, go ahead and turn the skylight intensity. And you could leave that. That one doesn't really matter. I was just going to say you can turn the intensity back down to 0 if you want to just kind of leave that out. Okay.
So, we'll back this off. Now, if we're going to start throwing around some bounce, we probably should increase our number of bounces a little bit. So,
but do you really want to jump? Now, please excuse us, guys. Do you really want to jump on that right away?
I know.
Because we can first just spend just a second and talk about this bounce boost and bounce intensity. Because all these guys work together.
Right. Now, bounce boost is basically going to kind of increase the reach of the bounce light, or how far the light is actually going to
boost our bounce.
So we can crank it up a little bit. Let's do something that actually, so we can see it. We'll bump it up near 3. And then we'll take our bounce intensity.
No,
you just want to do the 1?
No, that's right. That's
okay,
right.
You just want to do the 1.
Because it's interesting what you're going to see here, because without changing the intensity but increasing this, well, just watch.
I'm just used to working with them in pairs. So
I understand, but
like
this
force
way,
a habit.
This way, they're going to be able to really
see the effect of just one.
Exactly, and then how the other one will complement this, which becomes pretty important in a minute. So we're almost there. And now bounce being the big thing, the two areas to watch. Watch the bottom side of the sphere and the left side of that blue cube up against the wall. And yeah, a little bit out there as well. Really was showing on the floor in front of the cube, but mainly that back wall.
Yeah, right in here, in this edge, and then right in here. It become even more apparent once we boost the intensity as well. So
here we go. There you go.
So
now we haven't changed our intensity, but we've boosted it. Now watch this. Leaving that boosted, now let's up our intensity. Is there anything you want to point out?
No. Shall we go sunglass requiring intensity?
If you would like. I mean, it's definitely going to make it. Oh, that's crazy. Okay, back down. We don't want to. We can go up. Around 3-ish. Yeah. Okay. So now.
Yeah. Otherwise, we'd have to get the sunglasses out.
Yeah. So now again, intensity. Think multiplier.
Yep. Again, look for the hot areas of the light. That's going to be affected most.
Yeah, especially that back wall, as we're about to just blast. I gotta be careful with it. Blast the crap out of it with light that's bounced light. At 3, yeah, that should be enough to start burning a hole through it. I could be wrong, but I think that might do the trick.
It'll get us close. It'll definitely be noticeable.
Yeah, it's one of those things, if you start working with your bounce boost, you're going to find yourself needing to work with your intensity. Obviously not jumping it up as much as we're doing here, and you'll see why. But if you don't start bringing it up some, then you're not going to really look at and see the effect. All right, so let's see what we got.
Drum roll.
And where's my sunglasses? What'd I tell you? So we're now basically nuking the the wall with our bounce light. Also, take a look at the illumination on the bottom of the sphere and the illumination on the floor in front of the box, which is really interesting because that suddenly appears as if it's almost a light emitting source itself.
Right, we're getting a lot of color bleed. You can actually pick up the blue from the box onto the floor.
Absolutely. So now that you have that all turned up, now we could start looking at, well, what happens if we bounced more than once?
Okay. Shall we go there?
Wow. Okay. Yeah, you go ahead and go for it. Now that's going to bounce all over the place, which is fine. We just make sure we have a lot to talk about for a minute.
Actually, it shouldn't be.
It's
too
not
bad.
too much bad. It's
No,
not too much
especially
worse.
not
At 200
right.
final gather rays. This is true. So yeah, how about that weather today? Nice and stormy over here.
I don't know. I slept through it.
Did you?
Yeah,
Not me.
well, after recording all those videos until like 4 in the morning.
It was around 5:30 when I finally went to sleep, which was better than the day before, better
Right.
than 6 a.m. And it was about 10:45. That's what I remember seeing the clock, and I rolled over, and it was just storming outside.
I missed it all. It was, I think, about 12:30 by the first time I opened my eyes.
So I grabbed my iPad and jumped onto 3D Buzz and got myself caught up with posts and started going through email, and it was very productive for the next hour after that. We just kind of laying there, chilling out, thinking about, wow, we've got one heck of a recording day in front of us because we've got between, I don't even know how many video sets we're working on now. We've got the stuff that we've got Zach putting together. We've got several, at least 3 sets from you, my set. There's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff.
And it's all Unity.
And it's all Unity because that's the way it should be. All right, here we are. We're about to, there we go. I'll import it. And so watch very carefully now.
Especially this back wall.
Boom. Notice how we just introduced a lot of additional illumination. Now, Lee was talking about especially the back wall. He beat me to it. I was going to say watch the right wall because the right wall got a more even amount of illumination applied throughout it because of the bounce that's coming back with the sphere and the cube, and maybe even some from the back wall itself.
Right, and then if you look in the front of the box, it's pretty much glowing now.
Yeah. So this allows us to have light start bouncing all around. Now let's leave our intensity up and let's bring our boost on down. So let's say we're not going to give that bounce boost to it. So let's go below 1. So if we go down to around 0.2, like we're taking 80% of the boost out altogether. Okay. And let's give it one more quick bake with our 4 bounces in there.
We're still not doing too bad. About a little over 1 minute on each one.
It's not bad. And obviously this is how you'd want to work with a very low final gather raise setting to start getting a feel for what the illumination is doing, and then you can start upping that and working with some of the settings that work with the rays to give a smoothed out illumination.
Right. In some cases, I take the rays from 200 all the way down to about 20.
Yeah, which we can do that in a few minutes just to show them to get a really blotchy scene.
But it gives you an idea of where the light's going and what it's doing.
Absolutely.
It's definitely not pretty, and it's not something that you want to publish, but...
No, but it's very important to give you an idea as to what exactly is happening, as long as you're able to look at the scene and mentally extrapolate the data that's important and know that, okay, well, between these 2 globs right here, once we start upping our rays, we're going to smooth that out, but this is the intensity level we're working with. It's just very helpful because it's so much faster. So again, we didn't touch the intensity. So the intensity is still hardcore, but look what the bounce, bringing that bounce boost way down below a value of 1, now starting to feel a little bit a little bit more believable again, because we're not taking all of that light that's bouncing off and allowing it to bounce off so far, providing so much more illumination.
Right, it just isn't allowed to travel as far as
No, we've just kind of brought it all back in, which in this case made it appear as if you diminish the light from the scene, and that's really what you're going to get from working with the bounce boost. Is it's turning it up. It's going to be like adding more light into the scene, but keep in mind you're going to have to work with the bounce intensity as well to really start to feel the effect. Not cranking it up the way we did. We just really want it to make it apparent.
And you'll start getting the feel for it, and you'll start working with both bounce boost and intensity in pairs, kind of like I was doing, just a force of habit. You know, if you tweak one, you start tweaking the other one just to get the right feel.
So let's take our bounces back down to say 1.
Back to the defaults?
Yeah, let's go 1. Yeah, the default's there. And, well, actually, because we're about to move over into our final gather rays, and it might be very helpful to have a strong boost and a strong intensity to make the blotches super apparent.
Okay, well, let's do a boost of 2.5, and let's do 2.5 on the intensity. We won't go as crazy as we were.
And do you want to take our bounces down to maybe 1?
Bring those down to 1, and then we'll drop our final gather rays down to 20. So make sure, whoops, didn't mean to accidentally click that. So we'll go ahead and hit bake.
So we're not working with a lot of rays here. So each ray responsible for calculating this this illumination amount. So let's let our light do its 1 bounce and calculation based off of the boost and intensity. And then with only 20 rays, now of course we have information up underneath that, parameters such as the contrast threshold, interpolation, and the interpolation points, which are going to work with your rays in smoothing things out. But the nice thing about having such a low number of rays is that it's going to get really difficult to smooth that out, and it's going to make it very easy to see.
Well, with 20 rays, pretty much anything that you dial in here won't be enough to,
to smooth it out. You
to bring it
have
back.
to get, in fact, you'll end up having to get it up to 70 to 100 to start smoothing things out.
Yep.
So just about there, and here we come. So watch carefully. Actually, you don't really have to watch carefully on this one. Boom.
Yeah, so it's very obvious what's going on. Now,
so again, this is just a reminder. This is all dealing with our bounced light. Take a look at the top of the sphere. Nothing weird going on there, for the most part. Yeah, pretty much nothing weird at all going on there, because
just
we don't.
A little bit, not much.
We don't really have any light bouncing down onto it.
Right. Where you're going to notice it is all the areas that are starting to receive information from the bounces are starting to get splotchier and splotchier. So places that aren't getting bounce light, like here towards the walls, the front of the scene here, have very large soft areas. There's not a whole lot of final gather rays that were used here to be checked for calculation of any light. Now where you start finding stuff is in the areas where there's a lot of bounce light, like the underside of the sphere.
Which is receiving bounce light up from the floor.
Right. Right in front of the blue cube on the floor, you can start seeing more detail.
And on the face of the cube where it strikes the floor and bounces up at the cube itself.
Yep. And we start getting more bounce light here. And then up here where the spotlight is starting to pick up, bouncing up in this area, we've got some detail. Now the biggest area is this back wall where the spotlight. And you can see most of all the final gather calculations was spent in this part of the scene trying to calculate what's going on in here. And that is partially to do with contrast threshold and the algorithms that are built into Beast. People who have degrees in mathematics that are way smarter than I am in math figured out how all this works. But basically what happens is you've only got so many final gather rays that you can allocate in your scene, and with this number so low, it has to allocate those in the best way it can. So it's going to concentrate all those rays where all the bounces and activities taken care of. And by bringing this down, you can get a very quick sense of where the bounces and the final gather is actually taking place. So with that, we can start playing with some of the contrast threshold if we want to do next.
Yeah, we can just quickly, we don't have to spend a lot of time on these.
Right. Basically, this one is something that you want to work in tandem with final gather rays. You'll find that all four of these work together in tandem. And as you lower your final gather rays, you usually want to tweak out your contrast slider to help smooth out what's going on. Now, if I bump this up quite a bit because we've got a lot of noise here, we're going to get some smoothing. But like I said, or like Jason was saying, we've got so few rays, nothing we're going to do is going to smooth this back out so it looks usable again. But it can give you a very good idea of what these sliders are doing.
Yeah, and I really recommend those of you out there that have never played with the system before, do just that. Put together something very basic, like Leah's done here, and just play with the numbers.
Yeah, and that's pretty much what I did the first time I was playing with it. Is just put something very basic, start dialing in stuff, trying to figure out what's going on. It's like going, you can look at the Unity instructions. They give you basically an idea of what the numbers are doing. Another place you can actually look at is actually the Illuminate website, and you can go into their documentation, which is buried in there somewhere, and they've got an even more in-depth discussion.
And here it comes.
Yep. As I was saying, they've got an even more in-depth discussion on what these values actually do. So as you can see, what we've done is we bumped up the contrast threshold. It started smoothing out the results we were getting. We're not getting the really small noise that we had before.
But you can still see our concentration of bounce light with the boost and intensity that we've got set at the moment is the bottom side of the sphere, the front bottom of the cube, up against that back wall over there. And we have an idea that it's a very strong amount of bounce light, very, very powerful, and we know that to be correct because of the bounce intensity and boost that we're using right now.
Correct. And this also ties in, like I said, we're trying to smooth out and get good results. The nice thing with these settings is you can dial them in, and when you're designing your lighting, what you want to do is tweak out all these settings so you can get the best results you can with the lowest number of rays that you possibly can get away with. The lower this is, the faster these bakes are going to take. So these settings are just helping you get there. Now the problem is you don't want to go, well, since how these all smooth out, I'm going to take them and slam them all the way up against the right-hand side. There's a downside with that, just like anything else. Once you start smoothing everything out, you're interpolating the information, meaning it's not based off of calculations. It's an estimate. You're not going to get as realistic of a result as you could.
Well, once we use all of them, like interpolation points, you're interpolating through points that you've set up between these two areas, giving yourself a more even illumination to get away from the harsh splotches we saw a minute ago.
Exactly. We didn't talk about that too. It's like interpolation points go between 15 and 30. Basically, it's going to try to average out areas using the numbers provided by a range of points, and it's going to smooth that out over that. This works in conjunction with interpolation, which has a range of 0 to 1, and that dictates what type of interpolation it's going to use for those points. 0 being a simple, as this says, or as the documentation in Unity says, a linear interpolation between all those points. Whereas you slide up towards 1, you're using a gradient type of interpolation. The problem with this is, as you get closer and closer to 1, you're getting more smooth results, but you're also introducing the possibility of getting artifacts into your image, which could yield unrealistic results. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to leave this up to 1.
Okay.
And we'll bake out again so we can see what happens, and actually what we'll end up with is an even smoother result. And once again, it's just a lot of tweaking back and forth and getting comfortable with what each of these sliders does.
We've already gone into much greater detail than I was expecting, and we're, what, over 30 minutes already, like 34 minutes on this video. Wow.
Well, there's a lot of settings there.
I was expecting more like 5 minutes, you know.
Well,
Jump in, jump out, but it's all right.
Well, you know, each bake is taking about a minute. So,
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
Well, you know, we'll leave something for the advanced lighting series.
Yeah, trust me, there's plenty. Yeah, I'm actually very excited about getting that put together. That's going to be some fun stuff with Beast's adaptive sampling system. It's
And here we go.
quite nice.
And it's smoothing out even more.
Yeah, a little bit.
Right. Well, it's more of a gradient. It's not a lot of the points, but it is smoothing out. You're just changing the type of smoothing that we're
So now
using.
if we throw some more interpolation points in there.
Mm-hmm. We can crank that up. Bank again.
Just going crazy with let's maximize everything.
Well, you saw the little bit of result we got with that one. So
I'm just kidding.
we're just going to make sure.
No, I'm just kidding.
Well, you know, we are getting older. Our eyesight is failing a little
This
bit.
is true.
So,
Maybe nothing changed at all. We don't know.
yeah.
So we'll let this run through, take a look at it, and then up underneath that, well, yeah, the ambient occlusion, some good stuff we need to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Some very good stuff.
That's a fun one, too. It adds a lot to a scene.
It does. I mean, I'm looking at the bottom corner of the cube. It comes towards us and around, and the wall corners. And, you know, with ambient occlusion, blah. So with ambient occlusion, we're going to get that shadowing in these crevices, these tight corners and all, especially going up the back wall as well, where the two walls meet.
Yep, and as you can see with the interpolation points,
Much smoother.
Much smoother.
But we just don't have enough rays. But watch this. Change your value of rays from 20 to, say, 70. So let's give 70 rays to work with, refire off the bake, and I bet you're going to see that it's going to smooth out a tremendous amount. Actually, it's probably going to be pretty darn close to what we had earlier.
Right. We'll probably still have some noise in this area and this area.
We will, but I bet you it's just my guess, but I bet you it's going to be subtle. Very subtle. We'll find out.
Mm-hmm.
But anyways, let's go back to the talk on ambient occlusion.
Yeah.
Kind of.
Well, ambient occlusion does a real good job of solidifying an object's location in the world. It actually kind of grounds it into the scene, because you have the contact shadows that you get with the cube where it's sitting on the plane, almost like it's
Really sitting on the plane?
exactly. Imagine that. But it provides self-shadowing within itself if it has crevices, but it also shadows the plane in the right at the contact point.
Mm-hmm.
I can say that really, I think.
And here we come.
Yep.
Let's see how close I was.
So,
just so...
a little bit of noise here, a little bit noise.
Almost
on
like,
the front.
looks like a cat. The shadow on the front of the cube. Okay, maybe my eyesight really is going.
You see a cat there? Unless you're talking like a
The
leg,
front leg,
a leg.
Yep, body, tail in the back.
Yeah.
Yep, very good. So I'm not crazy. Or maybe
Yeah, I
I
was
am.
just humoring you.
I got you.
You're crazy. Okay.
So, but with just bumping our rays up by 50, now that, and with the interpolation and the number of interpolation points that are being used, you've smoothed everything out.
Mm-hmm. And we came in at a 1 minute bake,
Mhm.
so it's not too bad. So shall we dial in some default settings and go for ambient occlusion now?
Yeah, let's go ahead and just back everything back off to more normal.
So let me put that back down.
Well, how well does it work when you take quality and you jump that back to high, then back to low?
Well, it'll just reset this and that one.
Okay, I was just curious.
Oops. And then puts me back there. So, but it doesn't adjust these settings. These ones are done by hand.
Right. Good.
Now, ambient occlusion has a couple of settings. Mostly, the first setting, this slider here, is the only one that you see because it defaults to 0. This slider influences how strongly the ambient occlusion is going to be applied in your scene, from 0 or none all the way up to very, very strongly. So shall we go with, say, 0.5? Or do you want to go all the way?
I say
with
go
1?
all the way so that we give it to them very harshly. And go ahead and point out the corners to watch, the box where the walls meet in the back.
All right, I'm going to leave this at 0.1. This is the default. I was playing around with the max distance earlier, so
Okay.
I'll leave it at 0.1, which is our default. Contrast is set to 1 by default, so we're going to leave it there. All right, so we'll do this bake. Now this is actually going to bump up the time. Ambient occlusion, especially in a large scene, can really push your bakes over the top.
Yeah, they can. But while it's baking, go ahead and I was just mentioning it, but you've got the mouse over there. Go ahead and run the mouse along the corners for them to really watch when this kicks in.
Well, what you're going to notice is along this point where the wall hits the floor, this one a little bit, not so much, just the way it is. Along the cube here is going to be noticeable, and along this corner in the back wall.
Very good.
Those are going to be the spots that are really going to show up with this.
And it's going to be quite dark.
It'll almost be like somebody's gone in with a black marker.
But it'll make it very easy to see.
That it will. And as you can see, it's already taken as long as it would for one of our previous bakes. So this one definitely does take a while.
How long was our last one? A minute?
Last one was a minute.
Okay. Let's see what this one is.
So my guess was it'll probably come in about 2.5 minutes.
You think? Yeah, she's still steadily calculating.
Yep. So, like I said, in the big scenes, you might as well plan on taking your significant other out to dinner, maybe a movie.
Go to bed for the night.
Yep. The nice thing, though, which is kind of funny, is this happens in a different thread on the processor. So this is technically all happening in the background. So while you're baking, you can still be manipulating your scene, albeit a lot slower unless you've got a very, very fast machine. So even the Alienwares, when I was baking out the maps, were struggling while I was still trying to edit while they were baking in the background.
And here we come. So watch all of those crevices.
Yep. So almost like somebody's taken a marker and drawn a line right down this back wall. You can see it right through here and in here.
Especially down there.
And right along this edge.
Very cool.
So that makes it very dark. And we came in at 2 minutes and 5 seconds.
Ah, look at you. All right, good.
So now the next one is the max distance. The max distance is actually how far it's going to look from these edges outwards to consider at the area to be occlusion or occluded. So I can actually dial this number up. We could actually be kind of crazy with it. Let's say 0.5. And what we'll see is this black area is going to actually spread out further. Now, while this is rendering, we'll talk a little bit about the contrast area. Basically, this is going to control what is going to be considered occluded and what's not going to be occluded. Because these are all 90-degree angles, I'm not going to actually slide this around and bake out. We won't really see a whole lot of difference. This is going to come more into play when you've got a scene that has a lot of different angles, both acute and obtuse angles, and you won't really see it here. So I won't waste 2 minutes on that render.
Gotcha. Just for everybody to say, huh?
Yep. It's like going, wow, that looked like the last render. So,
So let's see, what else we have on there we can talk about real quick?
Well, the other one is Lock Atlas, which we'll cover more when we talk about maps.
Okay.
And then we've got resolution. Now, resolution is, as you can read here, is pixels per world unit. Basically, what this means is it determines how much of a texture map a mesh is going to take on that texture. So let's say, for instance, this background plane here was 1 unit by 1 unit, or 1 meter in our scale. So what that would mean is with a resolution of 50, one meter will take 50 pixels on our texture map to represent. This being actually as you can see, if I can get control, this has actually been scaled to be 10 meters by 10 meters, or 10 units by 10 units, which is 10 meters by 10 meters. So at a resolution of 50, this plane actually takes 500 by 500 pixels on our texture map to represent. So that's pretty much all the resolution does. Now, we might be able to see.
I would wait before we do the
wait?
show. Yeah.
Okay.
Just
it seems how it's going back here now.
Yeah.
All
We'll
right.
show them in just a second.
Yep. All right. As you can see,
Increasing that,
Very
that
much so.
distance.
Yep.
Big effect. Now
So-
you can really see it.
yeah, instead of a magic marker, somebody's gone in there with a
Paintbrush.
I was going to say a spray can of black
Yeah.
paint and just traced out the edges. So
It's
now-
really just a matter of getting in there and working with the numbers.
exactly.
And you can get an idea. I mean, they're pretty obvious of what these settings are going to do. You know, how dark and how far out we're actually going to consider this ambient occlusion, the geometry that's all bunched up around it.
Mhm.
Okay, so let's go ahead and show them the
resolution.
Uh-huh.
All right, let's come in here a little bit closer so we can actually see what's going on. Now, when I check this box, you can see that we get a checkerboard inside of our checkerboard. We actually have one here too. It's just so fine we can't really see it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take our resolution and I'm going to drop it down. So now we can see our checkerboard.
Oh, yeah.
So basically what this is saying right now, this is just a visual representation to show you relatively how much of a texture map is being allocated to or for that particular mesh's light map. So as we allocate more or less, in this case where we've allocated 1 texel, which means 1 meter or 1 unit equals 1 pixel on our map. So that means the larger your checkerboard, the less space you're using for your light map, which means your light maps are going to look a lot worse at a resolution of 1 than they would with, say, a resolution of 50. Matter of fact, it's
Yeah, very dense.
right. Something like 10 is even better. So now actually we can bake out, let's do 1 just to do a bake real quick on that. But
Well, you could do a bake selected on the back wall,
yep, I'm going to turn off ambient occlusion.
and then a bake selected on the other wall with a different resolution. Just that allows us to demonstrate bake selected as well.
Well, what happens when we do a bake selected, it wipes out the other ones too.
A bake selected is going to wipe out our other ones?
Mm-hmm.
Okey-doke. I figured that it would do just on selected.
Mm-hmm. Watch.
Let's do it. Da-da-da.
So,
Are we done already?
yep.
Now it wiped out our other one?
Did it even bake? No.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
it
did.
did bake.
It's very fast. Just
Mhm.
baking the selected.
And turn off lights. It wiped all the other ones. So that's something you have to take into consideration, that if you do a bake selected, it will remove all the other ones. It recalculates and it will only bake the light map on what you've selected. Now that's kind of what Lock Atlas gets into. So,
Oh, I see.
so it will, you can go into, well, we'll cover that in maps. I don't want to get ahead of myself.
Right, because then that's going to take everything out of maps.
Exactly. But as you can see from our scene in here with a resolution of 1, we don't have a very realistic looking map at all.
It's not very smooth and evenly illuminated. Where if you were to take that up to 50 and do bake select, it
Well,
just
I'm going to do 10. We'll do it in
Okay,
a step.
sure.
So a little bit more. So now,
I wouldn't do bake. I just do select it since it's so fast. Allow them to see quick results. Boom.
so shadow distance. Trying to figure out
Your lights were off.
Oh yeah, thank
Hint,
you.
hint, hint, hint.
Yes, you can't bake maps with your lights off. How many times have I done that today? So there we go.
Okay.
So now we're starting to get
Then
a
you
little
kill your
bit better.
lights, just so we know, no lights.
Yep.
So smoothing out, definitely smoothing
Yep.
out.
It's still not great, but it's getting better. Now the neat thing is you can actually, if you're rendering these and doing light maps by hand, you can actually go through and tweak your light maps to look the best they possibly could with the minimum amount of resolution. So that's basically in a nutshell what resolution is doing. It's determining how much of your texture space you're going to allocate to any one mesh's light maps.
Okay.
So, and if we put it all the way back up to 50,
And turn lights on, select the wall.
yeah, I'm going to get there.
Oh, just in case.
Yeah, what, you think I'd do that 6 times in a day?
Probably not. No, select it. Select the wall.
Oh, it unselected.
Look at that. Yeah, oh, yeah, it unselected.
So it takes a little bit longer because we've got more
More detail that we're worrying
more
about.
resolution. So here we go. And let me select the lights, turn them off. And even better, but if you notice, there wasn't that much difference between
Yes, so
50 and
subtle.
10.
But at the same time, look at what it did to our render time.
Mhm.
It doubled, almost tripled our render time.
I didn't look at the last one. This last one was 10 seconds. The
As
other one
opposed to
was
earlier, it
probably-
was so fast that
we
you
were
know,
wondering if it even happened.
Exactly.
So that is also something to take into consideration when you're looking at baking out your light maps, is exactly how much resolution do you really need.
That's right. So that pretty much covers everything that we wanted to talk about on the Bake tab. And in the next video, we will talk about maps and the array of maps, as well as a little bit about the atlas. So that is going to wrap up this video. Thanks a lot.